1. I was living in Florida for a while, back in 2014 and 2015, due to work, and while I was there, I had been engaging in my own personal philosophical thought process about the nature of our reality. For a couple of days, I was really wrapped around this question, and it was sort of consuming my thoughts over those days, particularly whether we were living in a simulation or some type of video game. Well, nothing new there, right? Scientists and philosophers have been throwing that idea around for a while. Well, 2 experiences occurred that made me question my current reality, as it stands and happened in similar timeframes. Each seemingly innocent, but when put together seemed to connect. All of these events occurred after I started thinking intensely about the possibility of reality being a simulation. 1. I was working out with a trainer, and had a group of co-workers when we started doing squats. I started doing squats and the trainer stops and sort of laughs. Then he made a joke about how I look like a Sims character. That's innocent enough, right? I've seen the game, and I got what he was referring to. I laughed. But then he says it to me one more time, but this time he says it in a serious tone. Did you hear that, Tim? My name. I said you look like a Sims character. The inflections in his voice was odd. It was more like he was hinting at something rather than making a joke and waiting for my reaction. Perhaps it was nothing, but it was odd. But everybody else around me didn't react or even laugh at the reference. It was strange, too. So I enjoy creepypastas, and I like listening to them. So I started listening to this creepypasta and found it pretty good. Now, the night before, and that night, I had been thinking intensely about reality and all that. Well, as I scrolled down the video section, I noticed this guy's comment. Pete Detrick says, Tim, you're in a video game. I'm blown away but skeptical, thinking it's just a coincidence and that he was replying to some other person's comment. But as I'm scrolling up and down, I notice he isn't replying to anyone in the comments section. His statement is just out of context and oddly out of nowhere. I could imagine the person was perhaps making a comment about the story itself, but the main character in the story never mentions his name being Tim, or even has a name. Oddly enough, the story is about a person who commits suicide and enters some alternate reality. Right now I'm considering them both coincidences, but they seem odd and somewhat unnerving. I have one more experience, but it isn't quite as unique as these, so I'll leave it out. Following my request to use that story, the author shared the following experiences in addition. Possibly coincidences, maybe not. Pretty simple story, although it has 2 sub-stories, really. I started trying meditation within the same time period as the stories I mentioned before. I was practicing it and having trouble focusing, so I bought some beads which I read could help focus your thoughts while you did it. So I used them and they somewhat helped. So I did meditation for a couple of weeks, was somewhat getting the hang of it. Now, one day, they call a random meeting at work to discuss stress techniques and whatnot, and one of the topics is meditation. Okay, cool, right on time, I figure. We had never discussed or mentioned meditation in the workplace before I started meditating, by the way. So later on, I sort of fall out of doing it, and after that, meditation is never mentioned at work again. Odd, but whatever, coincidence. So, I end up tossing those beads away, and I move away to East Asia, Japan, more specifically, for work. So I'm getting on a bus, heading to a store, and go and sit in the back of the bus, and I shit you not. I look down and the exact brand, type, and look of the beads I have are lying on the floor in between my feet. I pick them up to see if they're real and whether or not I've lost it. Nope, they're real. I'm sort of freaked out and I just leave them there. Short one here and not too crazy, but it's another odd statement from someone that doesn't make sense. This time I lose my debit card, and I have to get a new one at a nearby credit union. So I enter the bank, and I look at the clerk, and instead of saying hello or hi, she just says, "Oh hey, we've been waiting for you." And the thing is, she doesn't say it like it was a greeting. She says it like a statement. Weird as fuck. I'm in the military, by the way, so when I say work, that's what I mean. You need to know this before I continue on with this story. It's pretty simple. I'm at work, and I happen to run into this janitor, who I end up having conversations with on occasion. Well, we end up talking again, and we're about to part ways. As we do, he looks at me, gets at attention, and salutes. I have no idea why he does this, and so I just awkwardly salute back like an idiot civilian would. Now, at the time, I had no intention of joining the military. Period. Wasn't even a consideration. Well, life took a different direction, and guess what? So, coincidence he saluted? Probably. But I have no idea anymore. So after the above event, I'm deciding whether to join the military, and I'm freaking out and having anxiety in my living room because I don't like making big life-changing decisions. So just as I'm in the middle of this attack, the TV is on. And part of the film Van Wilder plays where this kid named Timmy, coincidentally I guess, is talked off the school roof by Van Wilder because Timmy is having a nervous breakdown and making some major life choices in the movie. I instantly stop in my tracks, watch the scene, write down the quote just as Van Wilder says it in the film, and calm down. The following is the quote I'm talking about. Van Wilder, while standing pantsless next to the freshman. "But you know what I've learned in my 7 years here at college, Timmy? I've learned that you can't treat every situation as a life and death matter because you'll die a lot of times. Write that down." "I don't have a pen." "Well, remember it then. And you know something, Timmy? I think you've got the balls to make it here. Call me nuts, but I believe in you." I promise you I'm not making any of this up. These are all true stories and coincidences that have happened to me. It's all been very disorienting. 2. I've been joking recently with friends about how I've been experiencing what I can only describe as feeling like I'm on the Truman Show. This has happened multiple times very recently. One day I was watching a movie with my dad in which they mentioned the clothes brand Abercrombie and Fitch. This led to a brief discussion with my dad about the brand. When we stopped talking, I picked up my phone and clicked into Facebook, and one of the first things I saw was an advert for Abercrombie and Fitch. I mentioned it to my dad, and we both thought it was a bit strange. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and I'm listening to music and find this great band called the Chromatics. I've never heard their music before, even though it had been out a couple of years. I listened to one song in particular, which is called Lady. This will be important later. The next morning, I went with my mother to a garden centre, and after about 5 minutes, my mind focuses on the background music playing, and it's Lady by the Chromatics. I get a little shock over it, as I think it's very strange for a garden centre to be playing that song, and for me to be hearing it after I had only heard it for the first time the day before. When I got home that evening, I was speaking to a friend on Facebook, and I mentioned the experience. I also sent him a link to the song, and so I started listening to it again. I started scrolling through Facebook, and I saw a post from a local radio station announcing how a dog called Lady who was missing had been found. Just as the lyrics, "I was always looking for Lady," started playing. I got super freaked out by the event. It was probably all coincidence, but I felt so strange about each little event. It didn't seem like it was all coincidence. 3. In the spring of 2006, I was in the last French class of the year with 24 other soon-to-be-free grade 12 students, working on final essays while Amelie played on a TV at the front of the room. The next thing I knew, I was on the ground in an empty classroom with a mouthful of blood, and a teacher and a friend kneeling worriedly beside me. The upside of receiving a diagnosis of epilepsy along with your high school diploma is that you don't have to do any driving when going on a graduation road trip with your friends. I was also fortunate that the only seizures I suffered from, once the docs had me on anticonvulsants, were the absent variety, and not the tonic-clonic shaking ones. Unfortunately, I simply couldn't afford to miss out on a good 8 hours sleep every night, and anything more than a beer or two the evening before meant no amount of subsequent sleep was good enough. I did grow out of the condition, and have been seizure-free off meds for over 5 years now, but some of the experiences I had were quite unsettling. Now, you are probably thinking that amnesia is not a glitch in the universe where someone is time-traveling into the future. It's just a lack of memory formation, supported by everything except one's memory showing signs of the passage of time. And I agree. Fairly regularly and unexpectedly missing out on time gets you thinking about the nature of how we experience it. The classic trope is that the person you are when starting this sentence is not the person you are after finishing it. With each instant of time, your current self ceases to exist, and a new being, albeit a very similar one, is born. Nature of existence, live in the moment, etc. At first, when I had a seizure, my mind at the moment the episode began would travel into the future a few seconds, for a bad one almost a minute, which is expected. Occasionally, though, if I was very tired, I would suffer amnesia of the time leading up to the event. For example, if I walked into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of milk, I would suddenly find myself there holding a glass, but not remember even walking into the kitchen, where a normal case would be to not realize how long I was standing there holding the glass. While this isn't common with epilepsy, it is still easily explained as merely forgetting events. The true glitches occurred after my seizures became less common, and there were attempts to try and wean me off the medication. From the point of view of those around me, I would become completely frozen for up to half a minute or so before snapping out of it, which is par for the course. My experience, though, was of life continuing as normal for the duration of the episode, before I snapped back in time to when the seizure started. Now, this only happened a handful of times and never lasted more than a minute, but I have crystal clear memories of having lived the period of time everyone else just saw me seizing. It must be acknowledged that I am speaking now of my current self's memory of these events, which could be flawed. But events that occurred in my seizing timeline also occurred in the main timeline, and I acknowledge that they would occur. They weren't exactly the same. Obviously, I didn't have a seizure the first time through. But once I knew the phone was going to ring and who was calling, and another time that lightning was about to strike right out the front of the window. During the later episodes, once I realized what was going on, I was able to confirm some things with friends as well. I called what song was coming up next on the radio, and told everyone that my friend was about to tell us she couldn't make a party because she was going out of town on work. Sadly, these aren't very conclusive. It's feasible I might have already known some other way, but combined with my memories, well, if it wasn't a glitch in the Matrix, it was a pretty major glitch in my brain's anti-self-deception scripts. 4. First, let me qualify this by saying that part of this story is influenced by powerful psychoactive substances. But that is not the glitch part. Well, it is related. What moved me to write this post occurred totally sober. In fact, I have not taken any drugs in years since this particular experience. In 2011, I had just started college and met a new crowd. I was inexperienced with drugs, but started smoking weed with some new friends I met. A few months into the semester, and my buddy comes over one day and mentions that he is about to be getting a bunch of really strong salvia. I had never done anything other than weed and drinking, but researched salvia a bit and decided it seemed like something worth trying. It seemed pretty harmless since it supposedly only lasted a few minutes, and was even legal. I had no fucking clue what I was getting myself into. If you are not familiar with salvia, it is powerful stuff. Not make you feel goofy kind of stuff, but mercilessly run the fabric of your reality through the interdimensional wood chipper kind of stuff. I watched my friends smoke it and do stupid shit. They'd look freaked out and say weird things, go a little bonkers for a few minutes, returning with stories of weird hallucinations of Legoland and strange distortions of their reality. Being the noob, I went last. I went gung-ho and took the fattest hit I possibly could. I held it in until I felt like my lungs were about to burst, encouraged by my friends' jeering. By the time I exhaled the smoke, I was no longer in my body. I remember watching the cloud as it left my lungs and thinking how huge it was. I am not entirely sure what happened next. I felt myself beginning to cough, and then I had this intensely strange and unpleasant sensation down the middle of my body, like I was being sawed in half. The next thing I knew, I was standing in line at a movie theater, waiting to buy a ticket with my 2 daughters. They were young, maybe 8 and 12, both blonde. I think we are waiting to see an animated movie. I am a middle-aged man. My name is Jerry. Overall, it is a pretty normal day. I would figure out most of this later. In the moment, I didn't bother to question it. Nothing was out of place. I was Jerry. And I was going about my day, treating my daughters to the movie theater. I experienced the totality of being another person. There was no thought in Jerry's mind of my former self, of the hit of salvia I just exhaled, or anything else. I was just standing in line, waiting at the movie theater. I can remember what I estimate amounts to about 3 or 5 minutes of being there, waiting in that line, looking around the theater. Just as I got up to the counter to buy a ticket, I felt that horrible sensation in the middle of my body again, like a buzzsaw making its way through my sternum. Then I lost contact with Jerry. There were more hallucinations after that, but they aren't really relevant. It took me a long time to cope with being Jerry. When my friends asked what happened, I just told them about the horrible feeling and the weird colors and shapes I saw on the tail end of the experience. I didn't say shit about Jerry to anyone for months. I was sure they would all think I was fucking crazy. None of my friends said anything remotely like this when they finished their hits. I still to this day wonder if we all had intense and inexplicable experiences and were just too afraid to talk about them, instead settling on descriptions of Legoland and other garbage. But then, I was also pretty afraid I was crazy. I actually went through a period of depression after this, but eventually overcame it. Especially after finding some experience reports of salvia users who had somewhat similar experiences to mine, including an account of a man who smoked a pure extract of Salvinorin A and claims to have experienced living as a tree for 7 years. Okay, so at least if I'm crazy, I have some company. So far, this is all background information, and I know this is getting lengthy. But here is where it turns from a trip report into a glitch. Last week I ran into Jerry and his 2 girls in Target. Prior to this, I have never assumed Jerry really existed. I was quite sure that he was entirely confined to my hallucination. But there he was, precisely as I remembered him, and his little girls looking just the same. They have not even aged. Now I have never seen Jerry's face. I never heard his name either. But there were 2 layers to this experience. I was looking around having a normal day, but it also was just totally another person. I can't explain exactly how I know what Jerry looks like, or what his name is, but I have no doubt in my mind what my name is, and a decent mental image of what I look like. and I was Jerry. And I'm not about to forget those things for either one of us. So when I see him in Target looking at cheap cheeses, I had no doubt. It wasn't some dude who looked like Jerry with his two little blonde doppelgangers. There was no fucking way. I just stared at them for a long time, trying to confirm it was them. I followed them around for a while, trying to get a good look at all of their faces. Eventually I got too freaked out and decided to leave. I'm not terribly subtle, and I'm pretty sure they knew I was watching them. I thought about talking to him, but I had no idea what to say. Or if I'm crazy. Well, there it is. Without a doubt, the craziest series of events that I have ever experienced. 5. So I'm not sure whether it was a glitch or something else. But even though this happened 6 years ago, it still creeps me out. It's frustrating to think I'll never be able to understand it, and so I figured maybe someone here could offer some insight. When I was 14, I lived with my mother, and we had this gas heater thing which was used very rarely. One day it broke, so we took it to a repair service. And this is where it starts to get weird. The repair service was in this extremely rusty, suspicious-looking building that I recognized because I passed by it every day on my walk to school. But I always thought it was abandoned. There were no signs that any business was run in there. Never saw any people coming in or out. Still, I didn't think about it then because why would I, right? Anyway, we didn't actually go inside. My mother just knocked on the door and a man in a white uniform answered. In the background I could see maybe like 3 or 4 people in the same white uniforms, like glowing white. Also by the walls. They were glowing blue, so bright and sparkling it hurt my eyes to look at them. The man just took our heater, didn't ask any questions about it, or usual things like my mother's name, address and phone number. It was just like, "Oh hello, I have a broken heater. Okay, cool. I'll come pick it up someday. Okay, bye." And that's all. We went back home and thought nothing about it. After a week my mother called them and asked if she could come get it. And they said there was a burglary and our heater had been stolen, along with all other clients' things. I don't remember why, but we drove there anyway. When we arrived, there was nothing. It was the same old rusty building I always walked past by. Looked abandoned as usual. No sign anything was ever there. My mother went to some store nearby to ask what happened to the repair service. And people there were astonished and said there had never been any repair service or anything similar. After that, nothing more was done about it. My mother never called them again. After a couple of months, she went into the basement to look for something, but guess what she found instead? Yes, the damn heater. We are both sure we only had one heater like that in our house, and that's the one that had been stolen from the repair service. Now, it's been years since that happened. The heater is long gone, but it's the most creepy and unexplainable thing in my life. My mother remembers it the same way I do, the exact same details. People in weird white uniforms. People who work at repair services usually wear casual clothing, right? They didn't look like they are some wannabe surgeons. The strange, unsettling, glowing blue light, walls, the suspicious fact that they didn't ask her for any contact info or what's wrong with the device. She doesn't even remember why she picked that place, or where she knew about them from, or where she got their phone number. Now that I'm reading it, it sounds dumb and fake, but I swear it's true. And it both excites and terrifies me. I've never told anyone about it because they'd think I was delusional. And I'd think so too, if it weren't for the fact that my mother remembers it as well. Hey everyone, HelloFreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 true Glitch in the Matrix stories. Number 4. I've seen some requests for a Tinder video posted in the comments. I just want to let you guys know that that was the other possibility for today, but I don't quite have enough stories to make that happen just yet, so I'm still working on it. While there are many Tinder date stories posted every week, quite frankly, some people are just too damn successful. And we're more looking for the dating disasters, let's be honest. Okay, where are we now? Let's see. This is Thursday. And it will be paranormal on Friday. And it should be... No, what's the thing on Saturday? TIFU. That's it. Got enough for another one of those this week. I have been considering doing some political stuff, but I'm not sure how well that would go down. People get very, well, let's just say passionate when it comes to the political beliefs. I was essentially looking for, disaster stories involving people who've either worked for politicians, who are things that have happened while they're going about their work. It's a good time of year to do it. It'll probably never happen because I have looked previously to try and source stories and there isn't really much. I might look into it again. Let me know what you think. And with that, I think it's time I headed off because I've got a bunch of audio to edit. So until next time, thank you very much for listening and take very good care of yourselves.